Well-written dramas will craft storylines that are seemingly siloed to individual characters, and then crash those storylines into one another at the most inopportune and dramatic time. The Mastectomy two-parter is an example of two narrative locomotives headed toward one another at maximum speed. A worried Miss Ellie makes another doctor's appointment. She lies to Jock, telling him that she just has some errands to run and rejects his offer for a ride into Dallas. JR wakes up in Kristen's love nest in a panic. They had an agreement that he'd never sleep over, so now he's going to have some explaining to do for why he didn't come home. She tries to bond with him over the Southeast Asian oil well deal, which gives the audience some convenient exposition.
Not exactly, JR, considering everything Ewing owns is mortgaged, including Southport.
JR tells her he doesn't keep her around for her conversation skills, or her coffee-making skills for that matter.
That woman just cannot make a decent cup of coffee.
Back at the ranch, Bobby and Ray engage in some locker room talk about Donna Culver. Ray admits he mistakenly thought he was just a side piece, but it turns out both of them had much deeper feelings. In a nice parallel, that's exactly what Sue Ellen was doing with Dusty Farlow when she thought he was a lowly ranch hand.
Why'd you like me better? You thought I was a down-and-out cowhand.
Both Bobby and Ray seem a little too giddy at the prospect of Sam Culver's death. Like, it's great that Donna is going to be single again real soon, but, you know, don't be sex vultures. Ellie's doctor tells her there's nothing to worry about. Everyone gets cysts from time to time, but obviously he didn't read the title of the episode. At the local diner, Sue Ellen hangs out hoping to see Dusty Farlow, but she just spots a Dusty ganger. JR and Jock arrive at the office at the same time. Jock confronts him about setting up the trust for the first Mrs. Ewing, and JR admits he put it on the back burner because Jock is so healthy now. Jock goes all Thanos on him and tells him he'll do it himself. Of course, if he does, that means he'll find out that everything that the Ewings own is mortgaged to the hilt to pay for the Southeast Asian oil well deal. JR has to admit that he's lying about setting up the trust because, and get this, he feels like he's doing something behind Miss Ellie's back, and that just doesn't sit right with him. Meanwhile, Ellie tells Pam about her health worries.
Neurofibromatosis.
No, breast cancer. Ellie says Jock is still a virile, handsome man who has an eye for attractive women, and she doesn't feel like she'll be able to compete if she has to have a mastectomy. This seems like a harsh indictment of Jock, especially since he tossed Julie Gray aside at Miss Ellie's displeasure. But it makes a lot of sense from a psychological perspective. If you're unable to accept your own body and its impact on your self-esteem, it's often much easier to externalize that and lay the worry on the perceptions of others. Pam reminds her that their marriage is built on honesty, so she should share what she's thinking. This from a woman who spent nearly a month wrangling with whether to tell her husband about her neurofibromatosis diagnosis.
Neurofibromatosis.
There it is! After dinner that night, Jock and Ellie approach each other nervously like teenagers and admit they've both been keeping things from each other. Jock is the first to spit it out. He was married to a woman prior to meeting Ellie, but he divorced her because she had mental problems. Of course, all Ellie hears is that Jock ran at the first sight of a sick woman, which makes her half of the conversation moot. She storms out, thinking that she can't tell him about the cancer now. I do want to point out some great editing from Fred Berger in this sequence, as Ellie storms out past the family and everyone speculates what that was all about. JR lies and says he has no idea, and the briefest of insert shots of Sue Ellen lets us know she recognizes that he's lying. Bobby, who is allergic to sustained conflict, offers to help Jock smooth things over, and when Jock gives him the brush off, Pamela tells him about the lump, and in true Bobby fashion, he dismisses her contribution.
Pamela, something else happened in that den tonight, something we don't know anything about.
Okay, ultimately he was right, but I mean still. He's at the bottom of the hierarchy of knowledge here. Pam projects some of her own baggage into the conversation, explaining that a woman could be so fixated on perfection that any flaw could convince her that she's unlovable. Something that's only been exacerbated in the ensuing 4 decades since this episode aired. In another great little filmmaking trick, this one from episode scribe Arthur Bernard Lewis, new viewers can immediately get a sense of how things are not going right in the Sue Ellen and JR relationship, as they have parallel conversations here.
It was quite an explosion from Miss Ellie last night, wasn't it?
Here, my favorite time got a spot on.
For aspiring writers, there's no easier way to get tension across than to have two characters exchange dialogue from two completely different conversations. Sue Ellen says she knows JR is hiding something and teases that a divorce means a split in the Ewing assets. JR shoots back that her existence at South Fork is entirely dependent on his parents' happiness, so she should probably just back off this line of questioning. He also tells her to buy him more ties. Advantage, John Ross Ewing Jr. At the usual diner, Dusty actually does show up this time. Look at the way he perks up when he overhears Sue Ellen's name.
Coffee, Mrs. Ewing. Yes, thank you.
And look at the way Sue Ellen drinks that coffee. As if it were handpicked from the horniest coffee beans in Colombia by Juan Valdez's porn star cousin. These two are adorable. Dusty joins her and tells her that he wanted to talk to her, but he didn't want to call the ranch and cause a problem. Sue Ellen puts up some mild resistance, so Dusty just rolls with it. That brings me to my third aside, which is another look under the manhood. So, writing a male suitor interacting with a female character who is sending mixed sexual signals can be a bit problematic, and viewing a character like that in the 2020s may make people a bit squishy. And you can blame that on radical feminism, or political correctness, or cancel culture, or the woke mind virus, or any of the myriad of other euphemisms for kids these days are doing stuff I don't like. But if you think sex pests don't exist, you got another thing coming.
Being apart is not an option, am I right? I know I can't live without you.
So it's important to point out how Dallas gets this right, and how we can all learn a thing or two from Stephen Wayne Farlow. First, Dusty doesn't send pictures of his dick to the ranch. So there's that. Not exactly a high bar. Second, Dusty doesn't just project confidence, he is confident. He doesn't have to come up with a PowerPoint using Monroe's motivated sequence to convince Sue Ellen that she should sleep with him. He knows that she wants to, but even if he's wrong, it's fine because he doesn't make a thing about it. Their arguments in Rodeo were not about whether Sue Ellen wants him, they were about Sue Ellen lying to herself and treating him like he was a nobody. Third, Dusty does not lie to her about his intentions. In the Friends episode that coined the term friend zone, Joey points out that Ross got friend zoned, not because he got rejected, but because he never really made his feelings for Rachel clear. And no, can I maybe ask you out at some indeterminate point in the future is not the grab a spoon moment that Ross thinks that it is. Dusty is, in fact, highly explicit about his intentions.
I guess the sight of you made me hungry.
Fourth, he asks if he can sit with her. He asks her to stay and talk with him over eggs. He makes it clear that he wants to be with her and offers her the option to be with him. So Sue Ellen has all the information she needs to make an informed decision, and it's clear that it is her decision. That's good consent culture. If you want a good contrast with that, wait for JR's sniveling sex rodent manipulations of Leslie Stewart, and later Holly Harwood. Speaking of rodents, Alan Beam opens the official Barnes for Congress headquarters in JR's never-ending quest to get Cliff Barnes laid. JR is pleased to hear that Operation Rat is proceeding as planned. Unsuccessful at butting into the Jock Ellie fight on Jock's behalf, Bobby tries from Miss Ellie's end and similarly gets told to mind his own business.
I try not to pry into yours and Pam's affairs. I wish you'd give me the same consideration.
Well, I guess we know which side of the family Bobby's lack of self-awareness comes from. The next morning, Dr. Danvers calls and confirms they have a suspicious pap. So Ellie asks Pam to drive her directly to Dallas Memorial Hospital. Ellie does not screw around. At Dr. Elby's office, Sue Ellen ponders why she's so angry all the time. Oh, I know this one. Anger is a negative primary emotion, not negative in the sense that anger is bad, just that it is disruptive to communication in daily life. And it results from the perception that one's goals or needs aren't being met, and that the thing that is blocking those needs from being met is unfair or unjust. So if Sue Ellen's goal is to be loved, the thing that is standing in her way is that she's trapped in a loveless marriage, thanks to her gold-digging mother's efforts to raise her as a concubine instead of a woman.
What I am looking at is how hard you have worked to turn me into the perfect wife for him.
And I succeeded. When your father died, that's all I devoted my life to.
Elby asks if she's mad that he hasn't tried to seduce her. And Sue Ellen lies and says she doesn't want to be seduced by anyone. Note to self, invite Sue Ellen to poker night and tell her to bring plenty of money. In another great subtle moment in an episode full of them, Elby makes Sue Ellen get up and get her own water after she asks for some. She scolds him for not being a gentleman, but it's a tiny foot in the door technique to get Sue Ellen to satisfy her own needs using her own power. It also gets Sue Ellen to stop blocking, and she tells him about Dusty. To borrow a term from Sidney Prescott, Sue Ellen is sexually anorexic at this point, which Elby chalks up to Sue Ellen being betrayed by JR, and then trying to betray JR with Cliff instead of just, doing what will make her happy, not what will make JR miserable. He advises her to be Sue Ellen for a while, and we get one of the most vital turning points for the character in the entire run of the series.
Well, I'm afraid I don't even know who she is yet.
When are you gonna run for governor?
Cliff Barnes and Alan Beam finally meet. Cliff is skeptical as to Alan's motives, so Alan tells him that he wants to ride Cliff all the way to the top by hanging onto his shirt tails.
I'm very good at what I do, Cliff. Do you mind if I call you Cliff?
You just did.
Yep, an extraordinarily heterosexual conversation we have here. Alan says Cliff doesn't have to say yes, all he has to do is not say no, and Alan will do the rest. Oh, come on! Pam takes the day off and drives Ellie into the hospital. Ellie still refuses to tell Jock about the diagnosis. Pam also tries to butt in and gets the same treatment Bobby did.
I'll be ready in a minute. My daughter-in-law is just leaving.
Hold up. Hey, be thinking we saw.
Ellie's doctor being absolutely confounded that she's seeking medical treatment without her husband present is some good old-fashioned sexism. She tells him that she wants to go all out and cut it out at the root with the mastectomy, rejecting the less invasive lumpectomy. Pam engages in some malicious compliance, leaving Ellie's room and immediately calling Bobby to bring in the whole family. Jock is puzzled as to why Ellie would keep it from him, but Ellie asks if he'll leave her like he left Amanda. Ouch. In the waiting room, everyone reverts to their natural state. Bobby paces up and down, wondering how he can solve the problem. Pam wants to inform the rest of the family, and JR tries to suck up to his daddy by getting him a coffee. Meanwhile, Sue Ellen and Dusty meet up in some secluded woods, and she tells him she's not ready to do anything too crazy yet. Dusty, perfect man, tells her he's just going to be here for her if she wants to talk.
If you want to tell me anything about it, I'm here. But don't think you have to.
He does tell her that she should leave JR, though.
Why do you think that I'd leave JR for you anyway?
I didn't say leave JR for me. But if you want to leave, for whatever reason, I want to be there to help.
At the hospital, JR finally tells Bobby about Amanda. Of course, it turns out that Ellie was right all along. She had a malignant tumor that they couldn't see because of the cysts in her breast. So now they have to perform a mastectomy. And someone's going to have to tell Ellie when she wakes up. And that's where we leave it. As with all two-part episodes, I won't go into too much detail until part 2. But this one is chock full of great moments. Obviously, the big one is the collision of the cancer storyline and the Amanda subplot that has been brewing since the Dove Hunt. Ultimately, Ellie's cancer plot is just a blip in the grand scheme of things, but it was important for Barbara Bel Geddes, who had a similar scare in the mid-1970s. Post-Seinfeld, it's hard to believe that there was a time when television show producers thought of themselves not just as entertainment vehicles, but as servants of the public good. This episode, in addition to having a number of great moments for Sue Ellen and Dusty, helped educate the public on the taboo topic of breast cancer. And that alone makes it a good watch.